and welcome to Writing Essentials with Mrs. Benson, the grammar edition. Today, we're going to be talking about punctuation, and specifically, we're going to dive into commas. Let's get started. So, there are several different rules for your comma usage. I'm going to tackle each one at a time and give you some examples for each. The first rule is really simple and straightforward. It's kind of the easiest. It's the one that we often learn first, and that's that commas are used to separate items in a series. So that just means if I'm giving a list of more than 2 items, I would like to insert a comma after each item for clarity and so that I can tell each individual or independent entity in the list. So if you have all of the items joined by an and, or nor, you do not use a comma. So an example of that would be here. John and Jack and Jared are all friends. This isn't something that we typically do using a conjunction repetitively, but you can sort of insert a bit of drama or crescendo if you use ands instead of commas, because now it sounds a bit more dramatic. John and Jack and Jared. So it gives a little bit of a crescendo to your writing. Again, we don't do it very often, but once in a blue moon, that might be what you're going for. Most of the rest of the time, if you have 3 things, 3 people, you'll want commas after each person until you get to the end. Now, there is another scenario where you don't necessarily use, you do use commas instead of something else. And that is when you have very short independent clauses. So those can be separated by commas, even though you might be thinking initially, ooh, I'm creating a run-on because these could be independent sentences. But when we're talking about 2-word, 3-word sentences, and you're trying to give like a list of items or a list of actions that need to happen, you can go ahead and just use commas. Go to bed, comma, relax, comma, and get some sleep. That would be acceptable grammatically. Now, when you have multiple adjectives given for the same noun, you can use commas to separate those adjectives. What's interesting about this rule is that it's not an always rule. So my tip for you to know whether or not to put a comma in when you have multiple adjectives is to ask yourself if an and would work. If an and would work, a comma needs to be used. If an and would not work, then don't insert a comma. So here's an example. The bright, beautiful day. Could I say the bright and beautiful day and have it logically make sense? Yes. So I know I need a comma separating bright and beautiful. But then look at the gorgeous spring day. Would I logically be able to put in an and in between those 2 adjectives and say the gorgeous and spring day? No, it's too clunky and awkward. So now I know in that second scenario that an and would not work, so a comma is not used. So when you have multiple adjectives, if a and works, a comma works. If an and doesn't work, no comma needed. All right, you'll also want to use commas when you are combining 2 independent clauses with a coordinating conjunction. Remember, your coordinating conjunctions are those fanboys: for, and, nor, but, or, yet, so. So when I have one of those conjunctions in sort of the middle of my sentence, and I have an independent clause on the left and an independent clause on the right, I need to put a comma before the conjunction. The comma always goes before the conjunction, not after. So here's an example. Study for the test, comma, or there's my conjunction, you might fail. Second example, Greg read the book, comma, but my conjunction, David did not. Now, The third comma rule essentially is that if you have non-essential information in your sentence, you want to offset it with commas. So you might be asking yourself, what is non-essential? A clause or phrase is non-essential if it adds information that is not necessary to the main idea of the sentence, okay? If a clause or phrase answers the question, which one, so it makes it much more specific who or what I'm talking about, then it is considered essential and you wouldn't want to put commas in. So here's a couple examples at the bottom there. The boy who won the race has a scholarship. This is pretty essential. If I took out the who won the race, it would say the boy has a scholarship. That's pretty broad and vague as to which boy I'm talking about. So if it's telling me which boy, it's the boy who won the race, it's pretty essential to your understanding of the main idea of the sentence. So I don't put commas in. If it's essential, you leave the commas out. If it's essential, you leave the commas out. The second scenario shows you something that's more non-essential. The boy, hoping he did well, interviewed for the job. The main point of the sentence is that the boy interviewed for the job. The hoping he did well is just giving me a little extra tidbit about him, and it's not really essential for the main idea to get across. So in that case, I would offset it with commas. So you want to use those commas when you have non-essential phrases or clauses in your sentence. If those non-essential phrases or clauses start the sentence, then you only have one comma afterwards. But if they're interrupting something in the sentence, they're placed in the middle, you'll want to have commas before and after those phrases or clauses. All right, you also want to make sure that you use a comma when you have an introductory element. And I gave a lot of examples of different introductory elements. When you have mild exclamations or interjections like, oh, well, yes, comma, I'd love to go with you. You want to have that interjection plus the comma after it. Participial phrases to start the sentence, like I just said, if you have that starting phrase, then you put the comma and then go with your subject. Standing in front of the room, comma, John gave his speech. If you start a sentence with a prepositional phrase, especially two prepositional phrases strung together or a really long prepositional phrase, you want to make sure to have a comma. At the end of the day, comma, he left and never returned. And then lastly, adverb clauses. When you start a sentence with a subordinate clause, a dependent clause, you do want a comma after it. When you arrive, comma, please take a program. Now, another comma rule is that you want to use commas to offset elements that interrupt the sentence. This is similar to the rule about non-essential information. So any of those interrupters, you want to have commas before and after. Non-essential appositives are a good example of that. Jack, comma, the team captain scored a goal. Saying that he's the team captain is just some extra tidbit, but it really doesn't contribute to the main idea of the sentence that Jack scored the goal. So I can offset it with commas. This is a situation where an appositive is not essential to my understanding of the main idea. But there are some times where the appositive is pretty essential to your understanding in the sentence. For example, this second point here. My friend Alice is on the team. Notice how I didn't put commas before and after Alice. It seems essential that I know which friend I'm talking about. So this appositive is not offset with commas. Remember, if I'm answering the question, which one, then I don't put commas in there because I really do need it in the sentence. Shakespeare's play, Romeo and Juliet, is a tragedy. Notice how there's no commas before and after Romeo and Juliet. This is because Shakespeare wrote over 30 plays. I kind of need to know which play you're talking about. So the title is more essential than not, so I don't put commas before and after it. Now, you'll also want to put commas if you're doing some kind of a direct address. So if I'm calling out someone's name, Tom, comma, can you hand me a napkin? Or if I have a parenthetical expression is something you can think about as like worthy of being in parentheses almost. So it's a sort of an aside, if you know dramatic terms. So Debbie, on the other hand, doesn't have a car. So, by the way, on the other hand, those types of expressions are more non essential to a sentence. They add just more tone and mood. So, I use commas before and after them to offset them. Okay, that's it. I hope you enjoyed hearing about commas. We have a lot of uses for them, don't we? Commas got their own video. So make sure you're reading. The more you read, the more you'll be familiar with where commas go. Remember, commas always give a sense of pause or breath. So there's a lot of natural places we do it, that we put them into our writing, but we don't want to get comma happy. If we're putting commas everywhere, then it looks like we've taken a pepper shaker and peppered our essay, and it can be distracting if we use them too much. So you want to kind of stick to these rules as best you can and think about how essential or non-essential is the information you're giving, and just the different grammatical functions that you're using in your sentence. So take care, and I'll see you next time.